it's Reagan, and today we're doing one of my favorite videos to film. That's right, we are doing my winter reading and review video. If you're not aware, my season review videos are basically I talk about all the books I read each season and tell you my top 5 favorite books I read for that season. So the books I'm about to talk about are the books I read in the winter time from December to February. I read a total of 17 books, so I'm just gonna go ahead and show you all those books now. First off, in the month of December, I read Soundless by Richelle Mead, which I gave a 3 out of 5 stars. Then Passenger, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. Frozen Ties, which I gave a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The Thief, which I gave a 4.5 out of 5 stars. And lastly, Dreams of Gods and Monsters by Laini Taylor, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. Moving on to the month of December, I read The Thief by David Benioff, which I gave a 5 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read The Aeronaut's Windlass by Jim Butcher, which I gave 3.5 out of 5 stars. Then I read Wolf by Wolf by Ryan Groudon, which I gave a 4.5 out of 5 stars. And last, for the month of January, I read A Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars. And lastly, for the month of February, I read This Is Where It Ends by Marike Nijkamp, which I gave a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read The Curse of the Sphinx by Ray Wagner, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix by J.K. Rowling, which I obviously gave a 5 out of 5 stars. This was, of course, a reread. Then I read Persuasion by Jane Austen, which I gave like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. 3.5. Kind of in between that. I guess 3.25 out of 5 stars. Alright. Then I read Furiously Happy by Jenny Lawson, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read The Slow Regard of Silent Things by Patrick Rothfuss, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. And lastly, I read Starflight by Melissa Landers, which I gave also a 4 out of 5 stars. Alright, so those are all the books I read during the winter season. As you can see, a lot of them were 4 or 3 stars. I only had a few, I think 2 5-star reads over the span of 3 months, which is a little depressing. But I digress. So let's just go ahead and talk about my 5 favorite books I read this season. Starting out my list, I have Frozen Tides by Morgan Rhodes. This is the 4th book to the Fallen Kingdom series and definitely my favorite installment so far. This is a very, very fun, multi-perspective young adult fantasy series. People kind of describe it similar to Game of Thrones. I don't know if I'd go that far, but it definitely has a lot of interesting plot points like rebellion, love, forbidden magic, things like that that definitely hook you and keep you reading. This book was definitely my favorite because some of the plot points have finally begun to connect. Some things that we've been waiting for the whole series have finally begun to happen, and it was definitely really rewarding, so this was a very good read. I really, really liked it, and I'm glad I picked it up this winter. Next up is a reread, but because I didn't have a lot of 5-star books, I had to include it because I couldn't rank anything above it, and that is Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. I loved rereading this. It just made me feel so happy and at home, and I'm currently rereading the 6th one right now, and I'm getting the same feels. There is nothing like rereading Harry Potter in my opinion, and it just made me really happy. So it's on my list. I gave it 5 stars. It is amazing. You should read it if you haven't. You should reread it if you haven't done so recently. I'm telling you, it's worth it. Next up, I have Furiously Happy by Jenny Lawson. This is the first memoir I've read in a really long time. This is basically a collection of short essays written by Jenny Lawson, kind of highlighting and going through her struggles that she's dealt with mental health. She deals with crippling anxiety, depression, to name a few of the things that she goes through. This book is dubbed as a funny book about horrible things, and it truly is just that. It deals with some very heavy and hard yet relatable topics, but with such a hilarious spin to it that makes it extremely relatable and approachable and just lovable. And Jenny Lawson is so funny. I have since followed her on Twitter and Instagram, and it's been so worth it. And I really, really like this. I'm excited to pick up her other book, hopefully pretty soon, but yes. Next up is The City of Thieves by David Benioff. If you didn't know, David Benioff is actually a screenwriter and he writes for Game of Thrones. This book is nothing like Game of Thrones, but I found that to be an interesting fact. This is a World War II historical fiction novel that kind of has a satire element or like a ridiculous twist to it. It's set during the Siege of Leningrad, which you didn't know is a horrible time in history where hundreds of thousands of people are starving to death during World War II as they're surrounded by Nazis and just no food is able to get into the city. It's a horrible time. It follows our main character who's a young boy, and basically he's arrested for some stupid circumstances, and he's essentially told he can be free if he can find a dozen eggs for the colonel's daughter's wedding. And you're like, yeah, a dozen eggs. But this is a dozen eggs in the middle of Leningrad winter during the siege. Like, it's an impossible task. And he goes about doing this with his companion, who is such a character and is so funny. This novel deals quite well, I think anyway, with the horrors of war, but there's also this weird joy to the story that you don't really see very often, and I think it's joy found in humor that you don't really see a lot of times. At least I haven't read in historical World War II fiction. It is profoundly sad and yet weirdly funny, you know, and it's just a really, really great tale, and I very much enjoyed it. It's also very short. And the last book I'm going to talk about should be really obvious, and that is A Weissman's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss. Hands down, one of my favorite, all-time favorite book series. It's just so freaking good. This is the second book to the Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. It continues the story of the first one. I'm not sure which one I like more, but I love them both, so it really doesn't matter. If you're not aware, The Name of the Wind is a story being told by our main character retrospectively. He's basically sat down with a chronicler and he's telling his life story. The first book follows more of his childhood and his education at a magical university. The second book recounts different tales, kind of fleshes out the world a bit more, and it's so good. I cannot wait for the third book. Lord knows when it's coming out, but it's perfection. Alrighty guys, that is my winter reading and review and the top 5 books I read this winter. Let me know down below some books you've really enjoyed recently, as I would love to know, and I will see you guys soon with another video soon. Goodbye!